It's my distinct honor to introduce the last chapter in the series that we have been working through together, following the call, living the Sermon on the Mount. And this chapter, 52, incidentally, is entitled Our Final Authority. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teacher of the law. Matthew chapter 7. And then the chapter goes on to explore two different ideas. And the first from Kierkegaard about how we should not just be admirers of Christ, and actually pointing out how misleading that can be, and ultimately just a failure to pick up our faith and take it seriously, and how actually we are called to be imitators of Christ. And he explores some pretty interesting thoughts along those lines, but not just interesting, also really challenging. And then Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about how we cannot just read the Sermon on the Mount or Jesus' teachings and decide what we want to pick and choose from in those teachings, and how we have to not fail to put the words into practice. So I think the big question of this chapter too, and after we've sat here week after week talking about it, is how it's an active gospel, and Christ calls us to actually do something about it, and we should be cut to the heart and convicted by his words. And I think that's what inspires me, because it's also why I felt called to living out the Sermon on the Mount here in community, I think. So what were your thoughts, Rich?
Yeah, I think the key word here is, in the verse, is authority. Mm-hmm. If we believe that someone has authority, then we're going to put into practice what they tell us to do. We're going to obey their teachings. We're not going to just sit there and be edified and improved and feel, better after, listening to the words. We're going to seek to do them. And different than so many leaders in this world who have authority, Jesus actually exemplified what he taught. His whole life was a picture of his teachings. I don't think you find that with any other leader. There's plenty of people out there who tell you how to live, but whether they actually are living what they're teaching, it's very rare to find that. And we find it in Jesus, and that's ultimately how we can be assured of the authority of his words. And then, as Doreen said, to become followers, to become imitators of his life. And being an imitator of Jesus is not comfortable. It's difficult. How many of us admire, as Kierkegaard writes, poverty, misery, contempt. These are not things that we generally strive after, but that is the life that Jesus lived.
Yeah.
He also speaks about the story of Nicodemus, which I thought was interesting. Nicodemus was a Pharisee, a teacher of the law, respected enough to participate in councils and so on. Mm-hmm. And Nicodemus did see in Jesus, he recognized in some ways the truth of Jesus' teachings, but he was ashamed to be associated with him, and came to him at night. And Kierkegaard points this out, like many of us can admire parts of or much of what Jesus says, but not be willing to embrace it in front of others.
Right, and how he points out how that causes us to be personally detached. But I would also take it a step further and say that just being an admirer causes you to also just feel unfulfilled and restless. And I think that's also why it's so important to actually be an imitator, like you said, and see Christ as Kierkegaard says, as a prototype of leaving footprints for us who want to join him. That, and also the word abased he used, the abased one, and the humility in that leadership is also really remarkable, and not something that we tend to, or it's something we can easily overlook, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, particularly in Christianity, as it's sort of been mainstream for centuries
Right.
now, and a lot of worldliness has crept into it, and looking up to people for their qualities of
Their
charisma
charisma,
or leadership abilities. Jesus shows us something completely else.
Yeah. And it also requires a lot of sacrifice, which is a word that Christians don't really like, I think. We have to renounce our worldly things, and we actually have to transform our lives. And if anything, I hope this series, I mean, it's certainly challenged me to see where I have not done that. And I hope that all of you have had some interesting conversations and actually put some things into action as well.